And Corporal Roberts-Smith this morning will march with the children of two other of his mates that were killed in action. Sergeant Blaine Diddams, his children, Ellie Lou, who is 16, and Henry Diddams, who is 14, and the son of Matthew Locke, Sergeant Matthew Locke, who was killed back in 2007. His 17-year-old son, Kieran, will march with Corporal Ben Roberts-Smith today. I spoke to the VC recipient ahead of Anzac Day a bit earlier. Corporal Roberts-Smith, thank you very, very much for your time. You're going to join the Veterans March, accompanied by the children of two of your mates that lost their lives in Afghanistan, Sergeant Matthew Locke's children and Sergeant Blaine Diddams. Yeah, what does that mean to you, and what sort of thing do you say to the kids tomorrow?
Oh look, you know, I've known the families for a long time. Matt and Blaine were good friends of mine, and in fact were mentors to me when I first joined the SAS. And you know, I respected them greatly. So to lose them on a personal note was, one, quite difficult, but two, obviously I understand quite intimately what that means to those families. Having them march is very significant, because what it does is it provides an insight for the general population into that contemporary sacrifice, and you know, it's enduring. You know, those kids will live like that now without their father for the rest of their lives, and what I say to them is that they can always be proud, and I know that they are, of that service and that sacrifice, and they represent the very best of both of those men, and they were both, you know, extremely good soldiers, both decorated for gallantry, been in the army a lot longer than I had. So from my point of view, it really is a great honour, because I know if the shoe was on the other foot, that Matt or Blaine would do that for me.
That's a very personal relationship, obviously. On a general sense, though, you're also the ambassador for Anzac Day, so you take on the responsibility of representing all of the military.
Yeah, absolutely. So to be the ambassador for the War Memorial is something that is important to me, because last year I focused heavily on Gallipoli by actually being in Gallipoli. The year before that, I wanted to make a concerted effort to highlight the Australians in Vietnam, particularly, because when I was growing up through the army and through the military, they were the guys that I looked up to. They were the guys that gave me my Anzac spirit. So this year, for me, it's really about contemporary service, and with Afghanistan drawing down, I just want people to understand that there's a lot of people, a lot of soldiers, sailors and airmen and women coming home that may potentially need support, or just looking to be just respected for their service, because every conflict's different. Nothing's the same.
There have been thousands of diggers now that have served in Afghanistan, the next generation really of the Anzac tradition. Will they embrace Anzac Day, as we've seen previous generations? Of course, you referred to Vietnam, but many Vietnam vets to this day do not march. They can't deal with the memories, the painful memories of such a divisive time. But will your era, your generation, will they embrace the tradition of Anzac Day?
Yeah, look, I think it will take a little bit of time, to be honest with you, and that's simply because, like most returned servicemen, when they come back from a conflict, they're quite young. I certainly, the word veteran, for example, we don't think about ourselves like that. We're in the army, we're doing our duty, we're serving, and it is our job. So to make that leap to being a veteran, I think, in a mindset anyway, is something that's quite difficult. But what is important for contemporary veterans to understand is that as we received from the Vietnam veterans was the Anzac spirit, and it's now our job and our responsibility to make sure that we march proudly and are happy with what we've achieved. Because for us, it's not about politics, it's not about whether the argument's right or wrong in regards to the war. What it's about is service and serving your country and your mates, and then making sure that that the rest of your life is lived in that vein of the Anzac spirit, because it's our duty to pass it on to the next generation.
So that's the view of the service personnel. What about the tens of thousands of people that commemorate this day, our most sacred day as a nation, every year, get up to go to the dawn service, that trek to the battlefields of Europe or to Gallipoli? Why is it important that we do that?
I think from a point of view of us holistically as Australians, it's important because that's where our nation's values and our ethos was founded. You know, we talk a lot about Anzac spirit, and I've said it a few times already, but that Anzac spirit that was forged the day we joined as a nation and we landed on the beaches at Gallipoli, the way those guys fought, they were from all manner of occupations, they weren't soldiers, and when they hit the beach and they faced those odds, they didn't have a choice. They had to band together and they had to get the job done and keep each other alive. And over those years that they had to fight together, they forged some pretty core values that I believe we now, you know, sort of all utilise as Australians. And that's what's become our culture, if you like. So to be able to, as Australians, go back on Anzac Day and think about that sacrifice, commemorate the sacrifice of all those before me, is very important because it's where we come from. And as I said outside, what is fundamentally critical for people to understand is that freedom is not free.
What about adjusting from battle? You've faced some of the most intense battles of the Afghanistan operation. To come back home to your family, to your daughters, can you tell our viewers, those watching you this morning, what that adjustment is like?
Yeah, look, we don't get a lot of time to decompress in my particular unit, and that is why we have a selection and we're chosen to do our job. But it is a unique position to be in that you can literally be in a firefight and a week later be at home with your kids. But an analogy I like to utilise to sort of help people understand is that when my children were born, it was actually just after the action in Anzac, which the regiment's been awarded a Battle Honour for, and that was a big fight. And I came home and my girls came 6 weeks early, they were Premi. But when my kids were born, I remember saying to my dad that it was amazing to have seen so much death over 10 years and then to see life be born. You know, that's what I was thinking about when they were born. You know, thinking about the death and then to see them born was an amazing experience. And when you talk about it to people in that vein, people don't think about it like that, but it's just because that's our frame of reference. So to me it was very special to see my children born, very special. And as you say, when I come home, nothing else matters to me except being with my family.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary contrast that you put there from the decade of battle to the beauty of childbirth. What about your mates who have lost limbs, who are wounded, who have made such an enormous sacrifice? 251, I think,
that's right,
veterans have been wounded. Are we providing the support necessary? That must be just so tough to get on with their lives.
Yeah, it is. And we march on Anzac Day for those who can't. But what we can't forget is the sacrifice that has been made by those wounded. Because again, like the families, their sacrifice will be enduring for the rest of their lives. And in regards to the support, I think, you know, Afghanistan's in the limelight and everyone's seeing these guys and they're getting support. But we don't want things falling through the gaps. And when we do pull out of Afghanistan and it's no longer worthy of being reported in the news, that's when these soldiers are going to need to be looked after. And as with Vietnam, you know, in 5 or 10 years, we may well see a lot more issues stem from Afghanistan, and we need to be cognizant of that and ready to implement strategies to deal with it.
You've referred to Vietnam a few times, and I know that has been a focus of yours to give recognition to many Australian soldiers who did not get recognition at the time. It was a very dark time in our nation's history when they did not receive the recognition they deserved. I know recently you've focused on one battle, the Battle of Coral Balmoral. This was the largest engagement in Vietnam. It's extraordinary that more Australians aren't aware of just what went on.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, that was the main effort of having that story portrayed on a Sunday night to get the most amount of people watching. But you know, these were guys, again, that were mostly conscripts. And they went away and took part in a significant action like that. And in fact, the rest of their tour was no less dangerous or filled with conflict and contacts. But that particular battle, they were put straight in the middle of the MVA position, or the North Vietnamese Army position, and they were given poor intelligence and overrun, and were fighting for their lives, much like when the poor intelligence came through to those men in the boats when they landed at Gallipoli, and they were fighting for their lives. Because nothing changes. They were still young Australians, and they had to do the same as those guys that landed at Gallipoli. They banded together and they survived and ended up winning the day. And that is why, to me, it's important that that particular battle is highlighted, because I think it signifies what all generations of Australians are willing to do for each other.
I think it's an appropriate way to finish our chat this Anzac Day. Corporal Ben Roberts-Smith, thanks so much for your time and for being the ambassador on behalf of the nation. Appreciate it.
Thanks, mate.